3, 2, 1, live.
Yes, welcome everyone to this poster session regarding sustainability and the questions of methods and conflict of interest management for guidelines. We have a range of very interesting speakers here tonight, or this morning, this afternoon, wherever you come from. This is quite tricky with all the different time zones and people attending this conference. And I definitely say hello to everyone who has found the time to join this poster sessions. Before we start, and I start introducing the speakers, I would kindly ask the audience that if you have questions for the presenters, please use in this virtual conference portal, please use the live Q&A section. This is what I will monitor, and these are questions that will appear on my screen. If you use the discussion forum function, that will not appear on my screen. So this is where you can chat one with the other, but these would be no official questions for the presenters. Each of the presenters has 3 minutes to present this poster and 3 minutes for questions and answers. I think that we have quite some time in the end. So questions that have not yet been answered during this 3-minute time, we can definitely keep them until the end. Either the presenters can answer them in the chat, or we can discuss them at the end. So which it depends a little bit what the presenters prefer. They can choose themselves, of course. So this is the session on guideline methodology and conflict of interest management poster session, and I'm very happy to introduce the first presenter, which is Jessica Beltran from the Ibero-American Cochrane Center, and she is presenting on a selection process of the most promising self-management interventions for 4 chronic conditions. It is a grade-based approach using network meta-analysis. Welcome, Jessica, and happy to share your screen and presentation.
Yes, hello. My name is Jessica Beltran. Today, I will present our work on a selection process of the most promising self-management interventions for 4 conditions, where we use a grade approach to assess the certainty of the evidence and to interpret the results for 4 large network meta-analyses. Although the current evidence suggests that self-management interventions may improve some clinical outcomes in patients with current chronic conditions, there are still gaps in the evidence which made it difficult to synthesize the evidence on this topic. The COMPARE-EU project conducted a network meta-analysis to evaluate the effectiveness of self-management interventions and to identify the most effective and most promising self-management interventions for patients with type 2 diabetes, obesity, heart failure, and COPD. To do so, we first follow the 4-step grade approach to assess the certainty of NMA evidence for each outcome for the 4 conditions. This consisted in presenting the direct and indirect estimates and the NMA estimates and assess them their certainty separately, considering the domains of risk of bias, inconsistency, indirectness, publication bias, transitivity, and rating the direct comparisons contributing to the most to the indirect estimates, imprecision and incoherence between direct and NMA estimates of effect. For the interpretation of the NMA results, then we use a partially contextualized framework where all the interventions per outcome were classified according to pre-specified magnitude of effect thresholds, from large to trivial, in both the beneficial and harmful directions, and also by their correspondent certainty. With this, we got a list of the best interventions per each outcome, and then we classified all the interventions across outcomes, considering only critical and independent outcomes. Finally, using a color-coded system, we selected the intervention with the largest magnitude and the highest certainty across all reported outcomes. In the results, we can see that we selected 13 SMIs for type 2 diabetes, 8 for obesity, and 6 for COPD. That have an effect, all of them above the minimally important difference, thus that are clinically relevant, and with the highest certainty. Interventions almost always included an educational component, and most of them a self-monitoring technique, an action-based or emotional-based behavioral technique. As discussion points, large networks are challenging, especially if they are sparse, and then to draw meaningful conclusions, we require to have a very structured, comprehensive, and explicit process to understand the results and to assess their certainty. Although our results show that the field on SMI still need to improve the quality of the research and to use standardized methods, our results will support stakeholders to make informed decisions in the implementations of self-management interventions for 4 highly prevalent conditions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And if you may turn your camera on, we might also discuss some questions. So far, I have none seen in the live Q&A section. But however, when I read your abstract and saw your poster, I was quite impressed that you used the network meta-analysis approach, definitely to even get an idea of the relevance of self-management interventions across different conditions. I was just wondering, and maybe you could explain this a little further, how do you deal with the indirectness, especially regarding to different patient groups that may be more or less subject to a specific intervention? Because what I say, my experience from guideline development and assessing self-management interventions is always that some are very appropriate for a specific patient group and others are more appropriate for another patient group. So how did you take this into account when planning your network meta-analysis? Was that all covered by the indirectness, or?
Well, the transitivity and the indirectness both try to assess this issue. But the problem is that in such a sparse network, it's very difficult to assess the intransitivity. So it is actually a limitation of our study that we cannot really do a meta-regression to assess what you just said, that there must be a difference in the effect of the subgroups, like, for example, patients that are more severe than others, or patients that wish to have an effect on a certain outcome rather than looking for the whole picture of outcomes. No, so these are actually some limitations that we are still facing and try to analyze. This is a very preliminary snapshot of what we are working on, but we have also done sensitivity analysis to see if components of each intervention can explain better the differences between patients, the effects on different populations. But as I said, it's very preliminary yet.
Yes, thank you. Wonderful. I have a question here in the Q&A section. Sorry. You mentioned many of the interventions were action-based. What does that mean? Sorry.
Okay, so action-based techniques are include mostly like cognitive conductual therapies, for example, or any intervention that aims to change the behavior of a patient, like to start doing exercise, to change their diet, things that involve behavior. And emotional based are, they try to include mostly, for example, motivational interviewing, coaching, counseling. So this is how more or less we have divided the components, and this is all based on a core outcome set and a taxonomy that was also developed as part of the project. So everything is like a sequence of studies, no, within a big project.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Maybe if you have other questions and to think a little while about what you would like to ask, you can still type these in the Q&A section, and we may address these later when there is still time left.
Yeah,
so I definitely like, thank you so much, Jessica. And I'd definitely like to hand over to Hazel Fowler, Assistant Director of the National Health and Medical Research Council. And you are talking about increasing scrutiny and changing community expectations for managing conflicts of interest. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Corina. I'll just share my screen. Can we see that? Yeah. So I'm based at the National Health and Medical Research Council, and I'm in the public health team there where we develop public health guidelines. And a challenge we've been dealing with lately is the management of interests of people on our technical committees. So these are committees of experts, often academics, which oversee our guideline work. So why is this a challenge? We've found there's a lot of confusion, including among committee members, about what is considered an interest. And there's confusion about what is considered significant enough to be a conflict of interest. So we decided that we needed to address this confusion to ensure that people are disclosing interests as they should be, and that our processes are robust. And by having robust processes, we can ensure public confidence in our guidelines. So what have we been doing? To address confusion, we've developed guidance specific to each committee on what is considered an interest. And this includes examples specific to their guidelines, so they're easy to understand. And we've also developed forms that, this is for people to disclose their interests. These forms describe up to 19 different categories of interest. And for each category, members must provide details of relevant interests that fall within the category, or indicate nil to state that they don't have an interest for that category. So they can't leave the field blank. And previous research suggests that this approach tends to result in people disclosing more interests compared to forms that don't go into that detail with categories of interest and require positive disclosure. We've also developed interest risk matrices. You can see there's a high-level example of one of those on the poster. These are for the committees to help determine the level of risk of different interests. So a low risk interest versus a medium risk interest, for example. And how this works is the matrix lists factors that contribute to a risk being considered, an interest being considered higher risk. For example, close personal relationships or large amounts of funding. And for each level of risk, the matrix suggests management strategies that would be appropriate. For example, restrictions on members participating in decision-making. So the tool helps committee members make consistent decisions about the risks of different interests and helps them make consistent decisions about management strategies. So in summary, people involved in guideline development do need guidance on what is an interest, and guidance materials can help them develop this understanding. By developing forms based on best practice, we can increase the number of interests that are being disclosed. And by developing tools such as the interest risk matrices, we can assist committees to properly consider interests and make consistent decisions about them. However, our work at NHMRC is not yet done. We will be reviewing these processes to ensure they are practical, but also that they're keeping up with best practice. And I would like to thank the Dietary Guidelines Governance Committee who contributed to the thinking and development of these improved processes. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Hazel. Very important issue and topic when talking about guideline development. So far, I didn't see any questions in the Q&A chat, but I would definitely like to encourage you to participate and ask our panelists and presenters what you want to know from them. And I would be very curious, Hazel, how was the acceptance within your panel when you encouraged the uptake of these specific measures and the management of conflict of interest? What is your experience with that?
It can be a little bit challenging. So some of our committee members are coming from different backgrounds. Some of them have had, they've been involved in other guidelines where interests have become a big issue and they realise the importance of dealing with them upfront so that you avoid criticism down the line, for example. And others perhaps don't have that experience, and so sometimes it's not obvious to them why it's a big deal, or why some funding they might have been received could be considered an interest. So something that we have done with the committees is, particularly at the start of the process, I guess I think about it as a process of trying to get them worried. What could go wrong? In HMRC, if people don't like our guidelines, if our guideline steps on someone's toes or something, often it's our committee members' interests that they'll attack. So we'll provide them previous examples where we've received criticism and kind of point out, you could do all of this great work developing this guideline and you don't want it unraveled and have people not trust it because we haven't dealt with the interest properly. And we've found that's been really helpful for getting people on board and taking it seriously.
Right, and here's a question from Shanaz. Was there a separate subgroup that decided on the management for potential conflict? Or how did you decide about these rules?
So this depends a bit on the guideline. So currently we've just started up the process for reviewing the dietary guidelines. And for that particular guideline, there is a separate governance committee that was mentioned on the slide. So where we have, where we're appointing the expert committee that would be overseeing the development of the guideline for the dietary guidelines, those members' disclosures of interest went through a governance committee and they assessed those interests against their interest risk matrix to decide which people had sort of low risk enough interests that they could make it through to the committee. And as new interests are disclosed, I mean, hopefully we're at the start of the process, so hopefully we've got all of them, but there'll be new ones that arise as we go through the process. They will be referred to the governance committee to assess them against the risk matrix. However, for other guidelines that are sort of already underway, it's amongst the committee members themselves to assess an interest against the matrix, but we have a process where the member who has that particular interest would be out of the room while that assessment is being made. So it sort of depends, I suppose. Thanks for that question.
I think there's another question, but maybe we should keep this for the discussion later on with you on time. How did you address and balance the issues around politics, especially with your work on public health? But I think we keep that one for the discussion. It's so important. Definitely catch a cold. So, happy to introduce our next speaker, Yang Mo, if I pronounce it well, from the Landshut University. And Kelsey, I'm happy if you just start the pre-recorded presentation.
Hi everyone, I'm Chang Guo, coming from School of Public Health, Landshut University. Today, my presentation is analysis of facilitators and barriers in the application of artificial intelligence in clinical practice guidelines. Artificial intelligence AI was introduced into the field of evidence-based medicine for clinical practice guidelines (CPGs). However, the complexity of AI and the immaturity of theoretical basis lead to many challenges in the application of AI in CPGs. So we aim to systematically analyze the facilitators and barriers arising from the application of AI in CPGs. Medline-based and wearable science were sourced from the earliest data available until September 28, 2021. The literature screening and relevant assessment will be conducted by two independent reviewers, and the disagreement will be revealed through discussion. A standardized form will be developed for extracting information. After screening, 5 5,614 abstracts. We found 100 articles mentioning the application of AI in CPGs, and of these, 9 studies involved analysis of facilitators and barriers to the use of AI in CPGs, and we analyzed the above 100 studies. Most of the research came from European and American countries. There have been research working on it since 1993. 70 studies focused on the guideline implementation. Barriers included text guidelines, inconvenient access and retrieval, unclear definition of guidelines, barriers to conversion of guidelines into executable codes, the gap in communication between AI and the medical field. Facilitators included the development of computers, the spread of electronic medical records, specification of machine-independent format, and adequate service results and time. So these factors should be considered when applying AI in CPGs. That's all. Thanks for watching.
Yes, thank you. That was a pre-recorded presentation, and Yang is not with us today. Might be to the delayed time zones, and it might be quite late already. If you have questions on this topic regarding the use of artificial intelligence, please type these and we'll surely answer them once he sees them in the presentation, or either you visit the poster gallery or the lesson there directly. So thank you, Yang. And now I hope my colleague is not too much surprised. We decided to change a bit the order of speakers and would like to invite Monika Notaker as next presenter. She is Deputy Director of the Institute for help me, Monika, Knowledge Transfer at the German Association of the Scientific Medical Societies. And you're going to talk about the portal that you have installed for online conflict of interest disclosures. Welcome, Monika, and looking forward to your poster presentation.
Thank you, Corinna. It's the Association of the Scientific Medical Societies Institute for Medical Knowledge, actually. And I share my screen, okay? And we are here. So is this now visible?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So as you might know or not know, and Hazel, we go back now to the conflict of interest management. The Association of the Scientific Medical Societies in Germany runs a quality assured guidelines register with more than 750 guidelines. And in 2018, its declaration of interest form and rules for criteria-based appraisal of conflict of interest were updated. And this management is mandatory for every guideline project in the register. And conflict of interest have to be defined for each guideline topic. So the appraisal is done as external assessment, which means that a group member cannot appraise himself. And before I now present you the digital solution for this conflict of interest management, I just want to get you familiar a little bit with the algorithm for the appraisal of interest. So first, the individual disclosures are reviewed or by an external member or by a group, an assessment group. And then these forms I will show you are very broad. You do not only write what you think belongs to the guideline topic, but you are invited to write all the relations you have. And then the guideline review committee defines what are the conflict of interest for this special guideline topic. And then the seek if the interest in the disclosure form are related to the guideline topic, and they judge the seriousness or relevance in low, moderate, and high, as Hazel also showed. And there are different consequences. So for low, it's consider limitations in terms of leading roles. For moderate, it's consider abstention from voting. And in high, you are maybe excluded in every case for this topic from the guideline group. On the left side, you see also protective factors like pluralism of interest or other measures to minimize risk of bias, as for example, a formal evidence synthesis. And this is very exhausting. If you're a guideline author in several guidelines, you had to fill in this every time. And also for other reasons or purposes, you have to fill in conflict of interest forms. So we had a need to simplify this management of COE. And in 2019, we digitalized this into a password protected online portal together with our partner, the Clinical Guideline Services User Group, and Thorsten Karge, he's here for technical questions. And this is why I'm presenting this here tonight. In 2021, we developed an English version. And I show you now, this is the portal, figure 2, as you see, and everybody can log in with a password. And it's a secure server with a location in Germany. And we have distinguished roles with administrators who set up guideline projects, project coordinators who invite the authors by email, and authors who enter declarations, and then the COE appraisers. And this declared interest can be appraised in accordance with the AWMF rules or possibly other rules. And you see here on the right, figure 3b, the declaration of interest form has direct financial interest and indirect interest. And it's very, very similar to Hazel. Now you have here the several, in figure 4, the several names, and then you can show the individual, you can see the individual form, and the appraiser can appraise whether there are no, low, moderate, or high conflict of interest. And then you automatically can generate a summary table, and this you can, you can add to the guideline. And what I think is really very good, that we have different export functions, and now we also provide an export function to the ICM-GME form, which was updated recently. And this allows authors to have one place to store their interests and to exchange, to export them to different, for different occasions. And the portal is now being used in Germany by 72 medical societies for more than 250 guideline projects. It has over 300 users, and I invite you also to use this internationally. We are in contact with ICGME to be approved as an official ICE-GME provider. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Monica, for presenting this. Actually, I don't see any questions in the Q&A right now. And having a look at the time, yeah. Yes, they do appear right now. Sorry. What factors, from Hazel, what factors are considered in determining the seriousness of an interest? Is this specific to the guideline? Important question.
Yeah, actually, this rule, we have rules which are provided by our standing guideline committee. And when we discussed them, we couldn't reach a consensus on specific circumstances to be low, moderate, or high. But in the 3 years now, we we make this conflict of interest management, we provide some examples. So, for example, a low conflict of interest would be a single talk. You get paid by the industry. A moderate would be if your relationship with, for example, the industry is longer and you get more intense, like in an advisory board. And a high conflict of interest would be if you are more or less paid by the industry, or if you have a patent for something and you get money every time this is used. So more or less we have like examples which we provide to groups, but we leave the decision for the group.
Okay, thank you. With quick glance to the time, I'd say we stop it here, although we have another question that we could discuss later on. I just started so that we do not lose it. Thank you, Monica. We'll talk about that. I'm sure we'll talk about conflict of interest management later on in the discussion that's left, and we'll continue and proceed to Jufei Luo from Lanzhou University. We'll be talking about knowledge, attitude, and behavior towards practice guideline protocol among the guideline developers and users. So, Kelsey, would be great if you could start this pre-recording. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Xifei Luo. I'm from the Lanzhou University of China. I'm delighted to be here with you talking about the KAB towards guideline protocol, about the guideline developers and the users. As we know, a research protocol is intended to help researchers to improve the quality of scientific research by defining a series of methods to be followed and contributing to its transparent reporting. Studies show that the reporting guideline of protocols of clinical trials has improved by 8.8% since the publication of Spirit Statement. Prisma extension for protocols was developed in 2015 has been proved that improves the reporting quality of systematic review and meta-analysis protocols. But there is no reporting guideline for guideline protocols. Therefore, we launched a project on reporting guideline of CPG's protocol this year. This is an extension of that reporting guideline for protocol, abbreviated as REDP. We have registered it on eQuarter network. Protocols are in the process of being submitted. The objective of this survey is to collect KAB towards guideline protocol among the guideline developers and the users, and this survey is, of course, that form the initial item pools of REDP. We will design questionnaire to investigate the KAB of guideline developers, adapters, guideline users, and the other stakeholders regarding the guideline protocols. The questionnaire consists of 3 parts. First, the basic information about participants, such as gender, age. Second, the KAB with regards to developing and publishing a guideline protocol and the degree of support for the development of the REDP. Third, the survey respondents request to proposals 3 to 5 items that the REDP should address. We plan to use a convenience sample of 20 to 30 stakeholders. We will use SurveyMonkey for data collection. This work is on the way, and we will make the survey results public before the REDP published. And we hope researchers who are interested in this survey, including REDP project, could get in contact with me. These are the channels. You are more than welcome to contact me and join our project.
Yes. Thank you, Kelsey. And this was a pre-recorded presentation. If you have any questions, just proceed as with the former pre-recorded presentation. Just type them either into this chat here or visit his post in the poster gallery and contact him directly. Thank you. So then we will continue with our next speaker. That will be Kate Carroll. She is manager for clinical policy of the American College of Physicians, and He will also talk about the disclosure of interests and management of conflicts of interest for guideline development. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you for having me here. So again, my name is Kate Carroll, and I'm with the American College of Physicians, and here representing the work of the Clinical Guidelines Committee. So I'm going to talk about our methods for disclosing interest and managing conflicts of interest in the development of clinical guidelines. And today I'll provide you with the quickest of overviews. And if you're interested in more details, you can check out our published methods paper in the Annals of Internal Medicine. So in our policy, we are very deliberate in distinguishing between disclosures and conflicts. We ask our participants to disclose interest, not conflicts. And then we work through a standardized process to assess whether or not we consider the disclosure a conflict. This is a continual process, meaning that we regularly update disclosures and assess for conflicts throughout the entire project. So when asking individuals to disclose, we require reporting of all healthcare-related interests from the last 3 years. We also require reporting for self and household members and of both financial and intellectual interest. So with each update, staff review and refer potential conflicts to a conflict management panel for final assessment. This panel includes the Vice President of Clinical Policy at ACP and the committee chair and vice chair. Each conflict is assigned a grade according to predetermined criteria. Low and moderate conflicts are most commonly going to be intellectual conflicts, so we typically are assessing the relevance to the clinical guideline topic when grading those. However, for high-level conflicts, which are most often active relationships with industry, we don't consider relevancy to the topic. As the level increases, so does the extent of the restrictions. And so finally, this policy applies to all individuals who are involved in the development of the guidelines, not just the committee members. So we started fully implementing the policy in 2018 and have averaged 1 moderate level conflict per guideline since then. We averaged 0 high level conflicts, but that's because we do screen potential participants for these types of conflicts. Our methods are, of course, a living process. And so one area that we are working on is ways that we can refine our criteria for assessing the relevance of intellectual conflicts. And second, we do have our eyes on big tech and corporations that are entering the healthcare arena. So Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Facebook, they're all exploring products and partnerships to get into the business of healthcare. Large corporations too. A case example in the US is Walmart, a large retail corporation offers discounted general merchandising and groceries. So in 2019, Walmart began opening health centers, offering a wide range of in-store services. And in the last year, Walmart has also acquired a telehealth provider, entered the pharmaceutical space, and announced that it would be offering market solutions for self-insured employers. So this example just illustrates that healthcare-related interests are no longer fitting into traditional tidy buckets. And as the landscape shifts, we're going to need to carefully assess the new players and their interests as they relate to our work. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great insight into your policy, and thank you also for raising this final issue of what are the interests to come that we should have a specific focus on, and which we may have not considered yet adequately. Again, a question from Hazel here in the chat. You sometimes find people already on your committee for some time have new or newly discovered and significant interests, and do they stay then on the committee?
Yeah, absolutely. The interest change, as I mentioned, it is a continual process. So ahead of every meeting, we do an update and review of disclosures. So it's always a dialogue in a case-by-case situation. Our committee members are extremely well-versed in the policy. They help to develop it and approve it. And it's part of the training. So they know which types of relationships, which are mostly going to be industry pharmaceutical relationships that are going to place major restrictions on their participation. So they know to try and avoid those if possible. But for moderate or low level conflicts, those would not impede someone's ability to participate. They're still able to participate in all the discussion related to the work. It's just voting and authorship that they would be recused from. So they would stay on the committee in that case. And I'll say for the high level conflicts, there's always the option to, if you're able to release the interest and it becomes inactive, then it goes to a low-level conflict. It's only the active for high-level.
I think, Shannon, this also answers your question. What kind of policy changes might you make in response to the changes you discussed? I think you covered this as well.
So I don't know that there would be major policy changes in terms of the framework and the process and the structure. But as I said, we are constantly looking at how we're evaluating the relevancy to the work. So I think that the work that needs to be done for some of these newer interests is identifying what the threat is, if any, that we think that they would present in terms of a conflicting interest to the work, and then fleshing out, our guidance criteria for when we're making those assessments.
Okay, so I think one last question is here from the audience, and Monica, you can keep yours for the panel. I think we'll definitely discuss this later on, conflict of interest management. Do you have any tips and tricks for communication about intellectual interests with committee members who are new to this process?
Sure. I mean, I think being clear from the get-go about, as part of our new member orientation, all members are going to undergo training in this. We do have our paper, our methods paper that we share. And I think it is a bit of culture building within the committee, within our committee. Intellectual interest, you don't want it to feel like a witch hunt for this, right? It's not about targeting someone negatively for having a conflict of interest. It's simply just being transparent about, potential perspectives or previous conclusions that they might be bringing to the table. So I think that, having the committee involved in the development of the policy from the ground up is really important in getting that initial buy-in.
Thank you so much, Kate. Very helpful. And I'm looking forward to the discussions we might have in the end, given we have not too many questions right now. I would definitely like to introduce our next speaker, which is Celia Munoz Fernandez. She has pre-recorded her presentation, but she's here to answer questions afterwards. And she will talk about the first steps in incorporating resource use and costs experience with the clinical practice guideline on type 2 diabetes. Welcome, Celia. And Kelsey, it would be great if you could start the pre-recorded presentation. However, Kate, you would need to stop your share screening. That would be, thank you.
First of all, many thanks for considering our project as a poster presentation in the Congress. I am Celia Munoz, and I'm going to present the experience we are carrying out in the prioritization for research use and cost analysis in the diabetes type 2 guideline on behalf of the whole working group. As you know, considering the use of resources at the beginning of the clinical practice guideline development is essential to determine the steps to be taken by the working group. In the context of the clinical practice guideline program for the national health system in Spain, we are developing an update of the guideline on pharmacological treatment for diabetes type 2. And I would like to summarize the prioritization exercise and analysis to incorporate economic evidence to the guideline. First, review of systematic reviews of economic evaluations was carried out, and scientific literature databases were searched to identify studies conducted from 2010 to 2020. After screening by title and abstract and selecting systematic reviews of cost-utility analysis for diabetes type 2 pharmacological treatment, the main characteristics of the economic evaluation of each review were extracted. We collected alternatives compared, treatment characteristics, main methods of the economic evaluation, and results, for example, ICERs in original currency. ICERs were converted to euro and classified according to the conclusion of the economic evaluation: cost-effective, non-cost-effective, dominant or dominated intervention with regard to the cost-effectiveness threshold in Spain. The number of economic evaluations analyzing its comparison was obtained and concordant results were pulled. The main conclusions were presented graphically using a bubble chart. As you can see, we tried to reflect the cost effectiveness of each comparisons between the different active ingredients. Parallel to this analysis, a questionnaire was administered to health professionals in the working group with the aim of validating these findings. Finally, according to existing evidence and clinical experience, two comparisons were prioritized for further economic analysis. This process represents an example of how to anticipate the impact of research use on recommendations and to select those questions in the guideline on which to conduct more detailed economic analysis of literature reviews. Many thanks for your attention.
Yes, thank you so much, Celia. Now you're here to take questions. I'm looking forward to these questions. However, I was just wondering, as far as I understood, you performed a search for systematic reviews that focused on any aspects of costs or resource use. And how did these reviews deal with the quality of the primary studies? Which kind of instruments did they use to assess these? Was there any kind of criteria that you had, what the reviews should use? What was your idea with the quality of this kind of either modeling or economic assessment studies?
In this case, this is a preliminary analysis to identify where to focus on the clinical practice guideline development. So at this point, we didn't analyze the quality of those studies because the aim of this analysis is to identify whether there are consistent results and where there is any uncertainty in order to proceed to do systematic reviews in the procedure of the development of the guideline. So at this point, we didn't do this analysis of the quality of the primary studies, but we will do it now that we have identified those topics where we should analyze in detail cost and resource use, and then we will identify the literature for these primary studies, economic evaluations, cost studies, and so on. So in those steps, we will analyze the quality of the studies, and will apprise for risk of bias in the analysis.
Thank you. And the questions that you came up with right now in the comparisons, were they a direct result of only your search for these systematic reviews, or were they other factors that influenced the decision that you took these into account, specifically the new agents like GLP-1 and SGLT2 inhibitors?
Could you repeat the question? Because
sorry, my question was your decision to focus on this question and this comparison, was that only and directly from the systematic search of the systematic reviews, or were there other factors that had influenced this decision as well?
Well, it was influenced by the systematic review, but the working group working in the guideline, especially those health professionals working on the guideline, assess us and advise us on whether there are some issues, for example, with price or reimbursement in Spain. So there were a mix of the information, and we could analyze this kind of different information and sources, and to proceed to prioritize the topics.
Okay, so then thank you very much, Celia.
Thank you.
And I will continue, and sorry, it's not very polite, but will introduce myself, because I will step in for my colleague Peggy, who is indisposed today. She's with us, will listen, but is definitely not able to talk today. So I will step in and present her poster from our institution, the German Agency for Quality in Medicine. And the topic she has been working on together with me is how to reduce waste through a targeted approach of evidence acquisition. Let's start this screen right now. How it works? No, not yet. So a few words on the background, which is the German National Disease Management Guidelines Program that was founded in 2002 by the leading associations, medical associations in Germany, and the Association of the Scientific Medical Societies. It is coordinated through our institution. They are evidence-based guidelines on highly prevalent chronic conditions. And here we report our experience on a targeted approach to evidence acquisition in the National Disease Management Guideline on the major depression that started in September 2019 and is ongoing, but is very advanced, and we'll have a large consensus conference in like 6 weeks or so. So the methods, so that you just understand what we did, we have installed a two-step approach to evidence acquisition, because this is really a large guideline, and we have to be resource conscious with the with how we update our guidelines. This was an updating process. And what we started is that we at first did a cross-topic search for systematic reviews or health technology assessments from Cochrane, the HRQ, the German Institute for Quality and Efficiency in Healthcare, or the Joanna Briggs Institute, because these are institutes where we know they have an adequate reporting quality and they adhere to high quality standards. And we did a search that just searched for depression and all the synonyms, and we tried to retrieve as many systematic reviews as possible. And based on the results of this search, the guideline panel weighted whether these reviews were adequate for answering clinical questions or not. And they identified 9 PICOs, I must say only 9 PICO questions that could not be answered adequately by this targeted approach. And for these 9 PICOs, we performed additional systematic searches for systematic reviews. That's how we do it always, just using at least 2 databases, very sensitive search strategy, and so on. And we assessed the quality of these included reviews using AMSTA, and here we compare the AMSTA ratings of the identified reviews and the impact that these reviews had for the decision-making regarding the recommendations. So what we see here is that for these 9 systematic searches, we had like 4,000 hits. After title abstract screening, we included only 7.5% of these. 2.2% after full text screening, 1.2%. We found that AMSTA rating was acceptable. That means that was not very, that was not critically low, with a lot of critical items missed. And we had only 0.3% that were at high or moderate quality. And however, these numbers refer to only 9 PICOs out of a total of 97 recommendations so far. And if we compare this to the targeted search, which covered the whole guideline, we there had like 466 hits in the search. After title abstract screening, we included 74, and after full text screening, 42. And you see then that this number remains pretty much the same. So all were of acceptable quality, and only 3 of them were not rated high or moderate quality. And the AMSTA readings are presented here. Ratings are presented here as well in this diagram. with green referring to high or moderate quality, or the blue, the shades of blue to low to very low to unacceptable quality. So, points for discussion was that the targeted cross-topic search covered a wide range of clinical questions, and all the identified systematic reviews were of at least acceptable quality. We can discuss what acceptable quality means. We thought that once we don't have any other systematic review, and we have a systematic review scoring critically low, which, for example, only which was dates from quite earlier time, where AMSAP was not yet published, and has no list of it does not provide a list of excluded full text, and does not provide a protocol. We would agree to use this review even if we rated it critically low, but this is an issue that can be discussed. But however, we found that all our systematic reviews that we identified through the targeted approach were of good quality. That means moderate to high in most of the cases, and low in only three. In contrast, the majority of the systematic reviews identified through the systematic searches for only 9 PICOs. The majority of them was of inadequate quality and not suitable for inclusion in the guideline, though very resource demanding. However, we had to do this because we did not reach sufficient coverage of these questions through this targeted approach. So what we found is that this stepwise approach is a resource-efficient method to answering clinical questions by reducing the needs to conduct resource-intensive systematic searches. The idea that goes a little bit further even is that we should encourage collaboration and, for instance, connect with, let's say, Cochrane, and ask whether they would or would not plan a systematic review on an item, on a clinical question that we found was not adequately answered through a Cochrane review, for example. So this is our approach that we wanted to present to you, and maybe discuss any consequences. If there were questions right now, I cannot ask myself any questions. So if I don't see any in the Q&A section right now, I'm happy to proceed. I just wait a little minute or so, but I just stop my screen sharing here. And if not, I'm very happy to proceed to the next presenter, which would be Shahnaz Sultan from the, she's Associate Professor of Medicine from the University of Minnesota. Welcome, Shahnaz, and you will present on the International Needs Assessment Survey of guideline developers that indicates areas for improvement in conflict of interest disclosure and management processes. Welcome, Shahnaz, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Yes, so it's a pleasure to be here today. I will be presenting on behalf of the US Grade Network and the GIN Collaboration Work Group about conflict of interest. Conflict of interest disclosure and management policies are key components of reporting and appraisal tools for guideline quality. As part of a larger survey that was conducted from guideline producing organizations worldwide, the survey focused on questions related to perceived needs and resources, challenges related to collaboration, but we also specifically queried organizations about their guideline development process and their process for disclosing conflicts of interest. The electronic survey was distributed from November 2019 to April 2020 using electronic mailing lists, social media, workshops, and meetings, and including a prior GIN meeting that was held 2 years ago. And survey questions about COI policies included free response options, multiple choice questions, as well as questions that were on a 7-point Likert scale. From this larger survey, we had a total of 171 respondents, representing 30 countries and more than 112 unique organizations that were included in our analysis. We specifically focused in on 110 respondents that responded to our questions related to conflict of interest policies. Only 63.6% of organizations actually had a COI policy that defined potential disclosures, with about 61.8% describing a process for how a conflict or disclosure was actually managed. And only 50.9% described a process for how assessment was performed of potential conflicts that were disclosed. With respect to timing of disclosures, the majority reported that COI was collected at the beginning of the guideline development process, and less than half reported that the collection of COI was obtained at any other time in the process. For example, annually during a potential face-to-face meeting, publication process, or even when a guideline was being considered for updating. In conclusion, there's a need for improvement in COI disclosure processes among guideline developers. And I think there's an opportunity to disseminate a lot of the work that's been presented during this panel from some of our co-presenters. And I commend the work that was presented by Hazel, Monica, and Kate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shannon. That was very interesting. I think it's a very important survey that you've been doing with quite astonishing results. However, I actually do not see any questions right now in the Q&A section. I could imagine there are some upcoming, but I would like to know, could you identify a little bit more what the respondents were? And do you think there is might there be a bias due to those who responded to the survey? As far as I understood, your recruitment strategy was through mailings and like this snowball recruitment. So how do you think, or do you think that introduced a little bias on the one hand, and on the other hand, what were the respondents like? Were it more specialty societies, or were this national bodies, or was it very mixed? So what were the characteristics?
Yes, thank you very much, Corinna. So we, as much as possible, tried to broadly reach as many different organizations as we could, really targeting not only the US, but also outside the US. And so we used a convenient sampling method, and we did a lot of dissemination through other workshops. So through the US Grade Network teaching workshops, we disseminated the survey at that opportunity. And then also at the Guidelines International Network meeting 2 years ago, we specifically promoted responses to the survey in that venue as well. And then we reached out to a lot of different groups that do evidence synthesis work to support guideline producing organizations, and used those platforms to also disseminate the survey in about 3 waves or so. Again, trying to really promote uptake and completion. I think with survey questions and survey responses, there's always a bit of bias in terms of who is likely to complete the survey and what kind of responses you get. But we had a pretty broad representation internationally, as well as in the types of organizations, specialty organizations, as well as governmental organizations that responded.
Perfect. And here's a question from Hazel that I myself have as well. That is, why do you think so many guidelines don't have these processes?
Yes, I think this is a challenging topic. I think there's a lot of sensitivities around conflict of interest. I think there's a lot of discussion that needs to go into trying to establish those processes that requires consensus amongst the committee members in how to manage and resolve conflicts. And I think that hesitancy to deal with those challenges leads to a lot of organizations really just staying away. But I'm really pleased to hear about the progress that a lot of organizations have made. And I think there's so much opportunity with some of the work that was presented by our panel members, such as this portal that potentially could be disseminated more broadly. A lot of the sentiments shared by Kate about having transparency and publication of the process, I think also helps with setting expectations upfront about how a guideline actually manages it for the organization. So all great suggestions and opportunities and resources that I think can be shared with other guideline producing organizations worldwide.
Yeah, so it's perfect that this survey comes out of the collaboration working group. Maybe we should see collaboration also in terms of conflict of interest management. But what I found was good to see that most of the presentations came up with similar principles for conflict of interest management, and that shows, I think, that we could seek more collaboration here. It's great that the portal is available in English. It's great that you did this survey, Shanaz, and hopefully there are other emerging questions that we can discuss later on. But thank you so far. And I would definitely like to introduce our next and last speaker, as I just received a message from Jizhu that he is not able to present his poster today due to other occupations that he has, but he's very willing to answer any questions that you might address to him via the poster gallery. So our last presenter for today is Deborah Flores, who is a guideline development methodologist at the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario. And you're speaking about a completely different but very, very important and interesting topic, I think, that is how to address and include and enacting anti-discrimination and anti-racism principles in guideline development. Looking forward very much to your presentation, Deborah. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Deborah Flores, and I'm a guideline development methodologist at the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario. The objective of this work was to develop best practice guidelines, or BPGs, with expert panels that address health and wellness conditions specific to equity-seeking communities, such as our recently developed BPGs with Two-Spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, intersex, and other sexual and gender minorities, or 2S LGBTQI+, and Indigenous communities. Many members of these communities face systemic barriers in the health system in Canada that can include stigma, discrimination, racism, and implicit bias, all contributing to inequitable health outcomes. Different sources of evidence and perspectives are required during guideline development to foster an environment of inclusion, humility, and mutual respect. Several strategies were used to enact anti-racism and anti-discrimination principles in guideline development with Indigenous and 2S LGBTQI+ people, and supported all guideline development processes. These strategies included involving persons with lived experience as members of the expert panel, Indigenous cultural safety education for guideline developers, and the integration of specific frameworks or theories that included an intersectionality framework, an anti-oppression lens, the principles of reconciliation, an ethical spaces framework, and a trauma-informed approach. Here are some key findings for all guideline developers to consider when using different sources of evidence to foster an environment of inclusion, humility, and mutual respect. Engage in cultural reflexivity, practice ongoing critical reflection, and really examine one's attitudes, assumptions, and biases about people, as these can influence guideline development work. Create safer spaces and ensure ethical spaces. We can foster trusted relationships through the use of respectful, inclusive, and an affirming approach. Demonstrate cultural humility and practice cultural safety. Be humble, learn and respect the values and beliefs of other worldviews. Be mindful of language use and participate in reconciliation. Be aware of our individual and collective histories, acknowledge the trauma and harms of the past and the present, and promote and advocate for change. Future prospects for this work include continued and enhanced efforts to promote anti-discrimination and anti-racism principles in future guideline development, such as emphasizing the importance of engaging in ongoing critical reflection, strengthening our cultural safety practices, ensuring more attention to inclusive language use across all guideline development, and continue to develop and integrate additional actions towards reconciliation in all of our work. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Deborah, for sharing this experience. And what I would definitely like to know is, we were talking about the different sources of evidence that you have used. My question was, how did you identify these? Was that a kind of systematic search, or was that a purposes search, or what did you, how did you identify all these very different and very specific types of evidence that informed the process?
So in the early pre-development work of both of these guidelines, in the context of the early work that we performed, these theoretical frameworks and theories emanated out of key informant interviews, focus groups, discussion groups, out of our early literature review, and as well when we put the expert panels together for both of these guidelines, we had some input as well from our co-chairs on the expert panel, as well as members of the expert panel. And so we had some discussion in the early meetings with the expert panel, and then came to a consensus with the panel around which frameworks and theories would support the guideline development.
So a very comprehensive process. Thank you. And here's a question from Hazel asking, you mentioned you included people with lived experience on your panel. Did this include lay people or experts who also had lived experience? Is it challenging to help these people feel comfortable participating in the panel?
Yes, Hazel, thank you for that terrific question. Both actually. The panel, we had panel members who were researchers and experts, and also community members as well. And then on both panels, we also had persons with lived experience. And yes, we had processes in place to support persons with lived experience. And we have current processes under development that are actually being delivered at this conference this year around how to support persons with lived experience who are not healthcare providers or persons with clinical expertise.
Thank you, Deborah. And another question from Amy. What are some strategies guideline developers can use to ensure language is both inclusive and up-to-date? Any suggestions? And that might differ largely across different languages.
Yeah, so Amy, I'm actually not quite sure specifically. Can you just elaborate a little bit on your question and just tip me in the direction that you're hoping or seeking? And Amy's actually a co-author on this presentation, so so I'm not too sure what facet she's hoping that I'll speak to.
I only can read it out again. Some strategies guideline developers can use to ensure language is both inclusive and up-to-date. So have you had any suggestions for other guideline authors, what they could use to ensure a language that is inclusive?
Yeah, so I think that really the inclusion of both experts and persons with lived experience on the panel definitely provided a lot of terrific information and advice. And I think that being familiar with the current language use within these communities, we looked at a lot of gray literature. We looked at a lot of research sources around the use of inclusive language and communication strategies that would support the foundation of the findings for the research questions. We also, in our BPGs, we provide implementation strategies and provide examples. We have appendices in our guidelines that direct healthcare providers to resources that will further inform them with regard to inclusive language and how to frame the context and the setting for both communities.
Thank you. I think we just might open up right now for a little panel discussion. So it would be great if you all the presenters could turn your cameras on. And there is a question from Shanaz, who just has raised her hand. So just go ahead and ask it directly.
Yes, thank you, Corinna. I was going to add another comment. I think this is a really important topic. And I commend you for looking at this. There's been a lot of work looking at race-based medicine and the impact it can have on care, and certainly some of the work looking at how we incorporate race or ethnicity into some of the models we use for diagnosis or treatment. And I would maybe add to the fact that maybe there's an opportunity when you're developing recommendations to really think through the downstream implications of your recommendations for specific groups. And that may help you to kind of have more transparency in the recommendations themselves. So highlighting if there are specific groups that you want to focus on, thinking about what are the social constructs that might lead to differential applicability or implementation of recommendations that might worsen health disparities or worsen inequities.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I would just like to address now these questions that we have left out before, and all these address basically conflict of interest management. The first was, I think that referred to you, Hazel, but you might all answer. It was a question by Amia. How did you address and balance the issues around politics, especially with your work in public health? So the idea that there might come in, again, different conflicts like non-direct academic politics-related conflicts. Do you want to start, Hazel? And I'm happy if the others answer as well with their experience.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a tricky question to answer because it probably depends a little bit on the committee, but I'll give an example of the project that I'm working on where we're reviewing the effectiveness of 16 different natural therapies. So it includes things like Pilates, but also homeopathy, naturopathy, and so on. So in terms of, we try to balance things with our committee membership. So we've identified what the skill set is that we're looking at. So we've got some members who are there because they've got research expertise in natural therapies. And then we have some members and they're there because they've got expertise in systematic review methods and guideline development. And then amongst people who have expertise in natural therapies, we try to balance the different natural therapies that they've been involved in researching. So they wouldn't all have been people looking at research into Pilates, for example. So I guess that's sort of balancing the expertise. And then because we have so many therapies, we can't include someone with expertise in every therapy. So we've also got a separate stakeholder group where we need more expertise on how we define a therapy and some of those technical questions. And then we do also consider whether people have made, I guess, very strong public statements about, I guess, either for or against a particular therapy. So that's something that we would consider an interest. And I guess it depends a bit on the nature of that statement. So if they've done a systematic review and they've said yoga appears to be effective for lower back pain, let's say, and it's essentially just a statement based on the facts of the findings of the systematic review, that would be fine. But if, I guess, they've said things that are a bit more inflammatory, or you had the sense that they wouldn't change their mind if the evidence changed, let's say, then that would be something that might prevent them becoming a committee member, or if they might be prevented from being involved in decision making about that therapy.
Thank you. The others want to add anything? Monica.
Yes, I would like to add and also ask Carol then at the end that, like Hazel points out, we allow for, so to say, protective factors. We had, for example, a guideline for school measures in COVID-19. So we had all these teachers and the parents and from school authorities. But at the end, and we were really, they had different political views and roles. And at the end, we said that there is no special conflict of interest because we have this multi-perspective panel. And Hazel, you not like, this is what we allow as a protective factor, at the end. And I wanted to ask Carol, because I didn't read your very
Kate,
paper.
sorry.
Kate, genau. Kate, if you allow also for those factors.
Yeah, we do comment specifically in our policy that there are certain disclosures that are not mandated. Those include political, religious, ideological views, philanthropic donations, personal experiences with healthcare or family experiences. So there are quite a few individual experiences and viewpoints that we don't mandate. It's, you know, it's tricky because we're in no way saying that those are not relevant and not a likely source of bias, I think, but we did not feel that it was practical to assess them on a consistent basis, right? Consistency was a really important tenet of our policy, and that we wanted to be able to you know, apply the same management across participants. So for both privacy considerations and also just the burden of extensive reporting, like how do you even report that, that we decided that practically we weren't going to be able to implement that in a consistent and fair way.
Thank you. Any other comments? If not, I would like to proceed to another question that's basically directed to you, Monica. Regarding the online tool. This tool looks very useful. Is it customizable, and have there been any challenges for either panelists or guideline staff?
Yeah, I think it is very useful. We sometimes have the problem that the persons get the email invitation from the portal for declaration of interest, and it goes to the spam, and then they are very excited that they didn't get it. But at the end, this is manageable. And we have Thorsten Karge, who is also here. He is supporting all these technical problems. And it would be adaptable, I think. Maybe Thorsten Karge can add. Adaptable in the sense that we could, for example, include more forms or possibilities. The form, of course, and I think we all had very similar forms, is very strongly adapted to what is the GIN conflict of interest management content. And we could adapt also in the, you are free to say what is a low or moderate or high conflict of interest. This is manageable, yes. And also we have this RP function. So for example, this could also be open to another digital guideline development tool that would be also possible.
Yes, and another question regarding the portal was, did you find there was a learning curve as panelists transition to the portal system? Any tips and tricks for implementation? So did you find that was more consistent? Were they quicker with delivering the disclosures or whatever?
Is this, do you mean with the digital form?
Yes, that's what the question looks like.
The problem was that we eventually released the digital portal with our extension of the form, that you have to really write down every relation you have. And then they were some were really upset and say, this is too much. Yeah, we don't want anymore. But then when we explained them that you have to write down this one time for every year. So we have a renewal for every year. It is for 3 years. They learned that this is good for them. And that also we have all these export functions for the other institutions in the German healthcare sector. So now they think, yeah, it's good. There was a learning curve, I think, from 2019 to 2020. Yeah, we had a lot of questions, but now I think it's more or less okay. And this ICGME form was very important for a lot of authors, because this was formerly not so formal, it was now updated, and a lot of authors publish a lot of things. And so this is a really, I think, helpful.
And I just can say I'm a little bit biased, but as a reviewer of conflict of interest, I find it very helpful. And I was just wondering, Monica, do you have any experience whether it improves the acceptability of these ratings once it is done via a formal process in the portal, rather than someone sitting in his in his little room and doing all the assessments and writing all this down in an Excel table or so.
Of course, it is more comfortable because you have it all digital, and you can make your low, moderate, high. You don't have a lot of PDFs. We have very large guideline groups up to 60 people, and it was really a work before. And you have this summary table. This is better than before, I think. But what I want to say, this is not for the digital solution, but it's also digital, because we are doing now digital guideline sessions. What was very good for the acceptance of all this abstaining from voting and things was that we allow for double voting. So in our digital system, we vote all, and then these with conflict of interest abstain, or we can count them out and then we can see if there is a difference. This is not the digital guideline portal, but this is how we handle the guideline sessions. And this was very helpful for acceptance of all these rules.
Yes, we will have a short presentation on that, I think, on Wednesday. Shahnaz, you have a question, you've raised your hand, or a comment?
Yes, just a question, actually. So maybe for the broader panel, we often with conflict of interest are looking in the past to see how long that commitment or conflict has existed. And some organizations will go back 1 year, some organizations like ACP go back 3 years. Do you have a process in place for many of these policies for how future conflicts are handled, and for how many years forward they are not allowed to take any new conflicts related to a specific guideline?
Is this to apply to all the others who have presented on conflict of interest? Is it specifically for Monica? So you think it's for the broader panel. So who wants to answer first?
Hi, this is Kate. I can answer. So we do in our policy, once an individual rotates off of the committee, we do update their disclosures 1 year out. I mean, I think more than anything, it's preemptive for us so that we were aware that we're not caught off guard if the guideline is published after they've rotated off. Because we do, once they're off the committee, we have not gone the route of saying you cannot take on any conflicts. We would certainly hope that they wouldn't, but we just feel like it's beyond our ability to mandate that at that point. But so we do collect 1 year out, and then would report that in any publications that had not been produced yet. And we would our summaries in the published, we do include in each guideline a summary of how conflicts were managed. So I think that it hasn't happened yet, but we would essentially be quite transparent that once the individual rotated off, they acquired this level of conflict.
Thank you. Short comment from Monica with 2 minutes left. I think I would need 1 minute for wrap up, 1 minute for your answer, Monica.
Yeah, it's just that we do it the same, Shahnaz, and the guideline authors know that we will renew the assessment every year. So it happened, for example, that a coordinator had to leave because he had high conflicts of interest, and if you want to avoid that, you just should keep your category.
Perfect. So I think we've come to an end right now. The session is live for less than 2 minutes. I definitely want to thank all of you speakers and presenters. I think you had really great topics that you presented here. And based on the feedback that you got, even through this very impersonal question and answer type on the website, you'll see that there has been some issue for discussion. I'm very happy if you could continue this discussion after the session, maybe some contact, some emails, whatever. And I think it would definitely be great if you could exchange and collaborate for conflicts of interest management, but also for inclusion of other aspects like being inclusive in your guideline, addressing anti-racism, what you said, Deborah, but also be curious towards new methodologies like Jessica presented, being being conscious of questions of cost effectiveness like Cecilia presented today. So thank you for you all being here. For me, it's tonight. For some of you, it might be today or even tomorrow, tomorrow morning, don't know. But happy for sharing. Thank you for sharing your time with us, for sharing your insights, and for this very interesting poster session. And I hope you will enjoy the rest of the conference. There is a session on conflict of interest management, I think today, tomorrow, and another presentation on Wednesday. Perhaps we'll see you there again. Thank you and bye-bye. Good night.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.